Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. We're so glad you've chosen to spend some time with us today. If you enjoy immersive storytelling, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. Also, let us know in the comments where you retuning in from. We love hearing from our global family. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and prepare to embark on a journey of resilience and hope as we begin Left Behind, a dog as lonely survival. Buster was a dog built of sunshine and boundless affection. His fur, a rich tapestry of golden hues, seemed to catch and reflect every ray of light, turning him into a living, breathing emblem of warmth. His eyes, a deep, soulful brown, held intelligence and an unwavering loyalty that spoke volumes without a single bark. Every morning began with the joyous ritual of his owner, Mark, ruffling his ears, a gesture that filled Buster with an almost unbearable delight. Mark was his world, his sun, moon, and stars wrapped in a single human form. Their days were a rhythmic dance of shared walks in the park, the thrilling chase of a tennis ball, and quiet evenings. Curled up on the sofa, Buster's head heavy on Mark's lap, the soft murmur of the television a comforting lullaby. Life, for Buster, was a symphony of simple, profound joys. One crisp autumn morning, a different energy hummed in the air. Mark moved with an unusual urgency, his voice tinged with a strange, high-pitched excitement that Buster couldn't quite decipher, but instinctively mirrored with enthusiastic tail wags. Bags were being packed, tossed into the back of Mark's car, and a scent Buster vaguely recognized as Journey filled the air. He loved car rides, the wind in his fur, the world blurring into a kaleidoscope of colors and smells. This was going to be an adventure. He danced around Mark's legs, a living question mark of anticipation. Mark, however, seemed distracted, his usual playful banter replaced by a series of curt instructions and an almost nervous energy. "Stay, Buster." "Good boy. Just a minute." Finally, the car door opened. Buster, with a joyful yelp, leaped into the back seat, ready for whatever destination awaited. But something was wrong. Mark didn't get in beside him. Instead, he leaned in, his hand briefly stroking Buster's head, a touch that felt oddly distant, hurried. "You'll be a good boy, won't you, Buster?" Mark's voice was softer now, almost a whisper, and for the first time, a flicker of unease rippled through Buster's otherwise buoyant spirit. Then the door clicked shut. Buster pressed his nose against the window, watching Mark walk around to the driver's side. The engine rumbled to life, a familiar, comforting sound that usually signaled the beginning of their shared escapades. But this time, it felt different. The car began to move, slowly at first, then picking up speed. Buster watched the familiar landmarks of their neighborhood recede, replaced by open fields and stretches of highway he didn't recognize. He whimpered softly, a small questioning sound. Where were they going? Why hadn't Mark spoken to him properly? He tried to peer over the seat, but a large blanket obscured his view of the front. Confusion began to mix with a nascent fear. The journey continued for what felt like an eternity, the rhythmic hum of the tires on the asphalt, a monotonous drone. The sun, which had been a cheerful morning orb, began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Buster's bladder was aching, and a gnawing hunger had started to set in. He scratched at the door, whined softly, but there was no response, only the steady, unyielding forward motion of the vehicle. Finally, the car slowed, then pulled to the side of a quiet tree-lined road. Relief flooded Buster, a bathroom break, and perhaps a stretch. The door opened, and Mark's hand reached in, not for a playful scratch behind the ears, but to gently, yet firmly, guide him out. Buster eagerly hopped out, sniffing the unfamiliar grass, already preparing to relieve himself. But as he turned back, Mark wasn't waiting by the open door. He was already getting back into the car. Buster wagged his tail, trotting towards the door, ready to jump back in. He nudged the door with his nose, but it was already closing. The engine revved. Buster barked, a playful invitation, then a confused yelp. The car began to pull away. Mark's face, seen through the rear window, was unreadable, a fleeting glimpse that held no comfort. Buster started to run, his powerful legs pumping, chasing the red taillights as they grew smaller and smaller, disappearing over the crest of a distant hill. The dust settled around him, leaving him standing alone on the quiet road, the chilling silence of abandonment pressing in around him. The sun had set completely, and the world was plunged into a deepening twilight, cold and utterly desolate. His heart, once so full of sunshine, felt like a leaden weight in his chest. Mark was gone, and Buster was alone. The last vestige of Mark's car, a faint red glow, vanished beyond the distant rise, taking with it Buster's entire world. The dust, disturbed by the hasty departure, settled slowly, coating the sparse roadside weeds and Buster's bewildered fur. The air, which had been crisp and clear moments ago, now felt thick with an invisible weight pressing down on him. A profound, aching silence descended, broken only by the chirping of unseen crickets and the rustle of leaves in a gentle, cool breeze. Buster stood motionless for a long time, his golden body a statue of disbelief, his nose still pointed in the direction Mark had vanished. He waited, his ears perked, straining to catch the faintest sound of an engine returning, a familiar voice calling his name. But there was nothing. Only the encroaching darkness and the growing chill of the autumn night. His initial confusion gave way to a desperate, uncomprehending panic. This wasn't a game. Mark wasn't coming back. He let out a series of short, sharp barks, then a long, mournful howl that tore through the quiet evening, a primal cry of abandonment and terror. His barks echoed back to him, hollow and mocking. He turned in frantic circles, sniffing the ground where Mark's scent had been, where the car had stopped. The scent was there, strong and undeniable, but it led nowhere. He tried running again, down the road in the direction Mark had gone, then back, a frantic, futile search for a presence that was no longer there. His paws, once accustomed to soft carpets and manicured park paths, felt the rough gravel of the roadside, sharp and alien. Hunger, a dull ache that had started hours ago, now sharpened into a desperate pang. Thirst, too, became an urgent need. He remembered the cool, fresh water Mark always provided in his bowl, the delicious kibble that appeared like magic twice a day. Now there was nothing. Just the dry, dusty air and the smell of unfamiliar vegetation. He sniffed at the roadside, hoping for a dropped crumb, a forgotten snack, but found only dirt and leaves. The realization that he was truly alone and responsible for his own survival began to dawn on him, a terrifying truth his domesticated mind struggled to grasp. He had always been provided for, protected. Now he was utterly vulnerable. As the last sliver of twilight faded, replaced by the inky blackness of a moonless night, the world around Buster transformed into a landscape of menacing shadows and unfamiliar sounds. Every rustle in the bushes, every distant hoot of an owl, sent shivers of fear through his body. He was used to the comforting glow of streetlights, the distant hum of city life, the familiar sounds of a house settling for the night. Here, the darkness was absolute, the silence profound, punctuated only by the sounds of the wild. He whimpered, a small, lost sound, and curled into a tight ball beside a scraggly bush, trying to make himself as small as possible. His body trembled, not just from the increasing cold, but from the raw, unadulterated fear that gnawed at his insides. Sleep was impossible. Every fiber of his being was alert, hyper-aware of his surroundings. His nose, usually a source of joyful information, now picked up scents he couldn't identify, some of them unsettling. The damp earth, the pungent smell of unknown animals, the faint metallic tang of something he couldn't place. He missed the familiar scent of Mark, the comforting aroma of his home. He missed the warmth of his bed, the soft blanket he would need with his paws before settling down. His dreams, when they finally came in fitful, shallow snatches, were fragmented nightmares of chasing disappearing taillights, of Mark's face fading into nothingness. The night stretched on, an agonizing eternity of cold, hunger, and an overwhelming loneliness that seeped into his very bones. By the time the first faint hint of dawn appeared on the horizon, painting the sky in pale grays and blues, Buster was exhausted, his body aching, his spirit crushed. The night had been a brutal baptism into a world he never knew existed, a world where he was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The first rays of dawn, usually a signal for joyful morning routines, offered Buster little comfort. They merely illuminated the stark reality of his surroundings, a deserted stretch of road flanked by dense, unfamiliar woods. His body was stiff and cold, every muscle aching from the night spent curled on the hard ground. His stomach growled, a hollow, insistent rumble that resonated with the emptiness he felt inside. But stronger than the physical discomfort was the desperate, unyielding urge to find Mark, his mind, still unable to fully process the concept of abandonment, clung to the idea that this was a mistake, a temporary separation. Mark would be looking for him. He had to be. Driven by this singular, potent hope, Buster pushed himself to his feet. He sniffed the ground again, trying to pick up any lingering trace of Mark's scent, a direction, a clue. The road stretched out in both directions, an intimidating ribbon of asphalt. He chose the direction Mark's car had taken, a primal instinct overriding any logical assessment of distance or terrain. His pace was a desperate trot, his eyes scanning the horizon, his ears swiveling, perpetually searching for the familiar shape of Mark's vehicle, the sound of his voice. Every distant vehicle sent a jolt of adrenaline through him, only to be replaced by a crushing wave of disappointment as it passed by, an anonymous blur of metal and speed. He passed by fields, empty and still, then through stretches of dense, dark woods where the sunlight barely penetrated. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves, a stark contrast to the clean, familiar scents of his suburban home. He encountered the tracks of wild animals, deer, rabbits, something larger and more predatory, scents that stirred an ancient, buried instinct of caution within him. His domesticated nature, however, still dominated. He was a pet, not a hunter. The thought of chasing and killing prey, even in his desperate hunger, was alien and terrifying. He stuck to the edge of the road, preferring the relative openness, the distant possibility of a passing car, a human connection. Hours bled into one another. The sun climbed higher, beating down on him, and the thirst became unbearable. His tongue felt like sandpaper, his throat dry and scratchy. He remembered the cool, refreshing water from his bowl, always full, always there. Now there was nothing. He sniffed desperately at puddles, but they were stagnant and dirty, filled with debris. He saw a shallow ditch filled with murky water and hesitated, his instinct screaming caution, but the thirst was too powerful. He lapped cautiously, the water tasting foul and metallic, but providing a brief, inadequate relief. He knew, instinctively, that this wasn't enough. He needed clean water, and he needed food. His paws began to ache, then throb. The pads, soft from a life of comfort, were raw and blistered from the unforgiving asphalt and gravel. Each step sent a jolt of pain up his legs. He limped, but he did not stop. The image of Mark, his kind eyes, his comforting hand, was a powerful motivator. He had to find him. He had to. As the afternoon wore on, a new fear began to creep in, the fear of the unknown. He was in a place utterly devoid of familiar landmarks, of friendly faces. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden danger. Every rustle in the undergrowth seemed to whisper of unseen threats. He was a creature of comfort and routine, suddenly thrust into a chaotic, indifferent wilderness. As the sun began its slow descent once more, painting the sky with the fiery hues of sunset, Buster's hope started to wane, slowly, painfully. The road stretched endlessly before him, indistinguishable from the miles he had already covered. There had been no sign of Mark, no familiar scent, no comforting sound. The exhaustion was overwhelming, his body screaming for rest, his spirit weary from the relentless search. He found himself at the edge of a small, unkempt field, a few dilapidated barns visible in the distance. He looked back down the long, empty road, then forward into the deepening twilight. Mark wasn't coming. The crushing truth finally began to settle in his heart, heavy and cold as stone. He was truly, utterly alone. And the wilderness, silent and indifferent, stretched before him, an endless, daunting challenge. The setting sun cast long, skeletal shadows across the unkempt field, making the dilapidated barns in the distance appear even more ominous. Buster, his body trembling with exhaustion and annoying emptiness, sank to the ground, his gaze fixed on the darkening horizon. The hope that had fueled his relentless march had finally flickered and died, leaving behind only a profound sense of loss and a chilling awareness of his vulnerability. The world, once a safe and predictable place, had transformed into a vast, indifferent wilderness. The air grew colder, and a sharp wind began to whip through the tall, dry grass, rustling with an unsettling whisper. Hunger, no longer a mere ache, became a burning torment in his stomach. He hadn't eaten anything substantial since yesterday morning, and the energy reserves he'd built up during a life of plenty were rapidly depleting. He remembered the tantalizing smell of Mark's dinner, the occasional dropped morsel, the overflowing food bowl. Now there was only the smell of damp earth and decaying vegetation. Driven by desperation, he began to sniff around, his nose to the ground, an instinct he hadn't known he possessed. He nudged at clumps of grass, dug shallow holes with his paws, but found nothing edible. A small dark beetle scurried past, and Buster instinctively snapped at it, but it was too fast, disappearing into the undergrowth. The thought of eating such a thing was repulsive, yet the hunger was a powerful primal force, overriding his pampered sensibilities. Suddenly, a rustle in the nearby bush sent a jolt of fear through him. He tensed, his ears swiveling, his hackles rising slightly. A pair of glowing eyes, small and quick, darted through the gloom. A rabbit, his prey drive, long dormant, stirred faintly, but it was quickly overshadowed by his fear and inexperience. He barked, a sharp, nervous sound, and the rabbit vanished. He was a pet, not a predator. The wild was a terrifying, alien place, not a hunting ground. He realized with a chilling clarity that he was not just abandoned, but utterly unprepared for this new reality. Every sound, every shadow, seemed to hold a potential threat. As the night deepened, the sounds of the wild grew more pronounced. The hoot of an owl closer now sent a shiver down his spine. The distant howl of what sounded like a coyote made him whimper, pressing himself lower to the ground. He missed the security of four walls, the comforting presence of Mark, the knowledge that he was safe. Here, there was no safety, only constant vigilance. He was exhausted, but sleep remained elusive. Every muscle in his body was tense, ready to spring into action. His senses were on high alert, processing every scent, every sound, trying to decipher what was a threat and what was harmless. He managed to find a shallow depression in the ground, partially sheltered by a clump of thorny bushes. It wasn't much, but it offered a minimal sense of concealment. He curled into the tightest ball he could manage, burying his nose in his tail, trying to conserve warmth. The chill of the night seeped into his bones, and his golden fur, once so luxurious, offered little protection against the raw cold. He shivered uncontrollably, his body protesting the harsh conditions. His dreams were a jumble of fragmented memories, Mark's face, a warm bed, a full food bowl. all fading into a swirling vortex of darkness and the relentless, chilling emptiness of being alone. He knew he couldn't stay there. He needed shelter, real shelter, and he needed food and water. The instinct for survival, primal and insistent, began to override the crushing despair. He would have to learn. He would have to adapt. The first brutal lessons of the wild were being etched into his very being. Trust no one. Find food. Find water. Find shelter. The sun would rise again, and with it, he would have to face another day of this terrifying, lonely existence. The thought was daunting, almost overwhelming, but somewhere deep within him, a tiny spark of resilience, an ember of his former sunny disposition, refused to be extinguished. He was left behind, but he was not yet broken. He would survive. He had to. The dawn of the third day found Buster weaker, but with a newfound, grim determination etched into his being. The initial shock and despair had begun to calcify into a cold, hard resolve. He had to move. Staying put meant succumbing to hunger, thirst, and the relentless chill. His eyes, though still clouded with sorrow, now held a sharper, more focused glint. He limped along the edge of the field, avoiding the dense woods, his nose constantly working, sifting through the myriad of scents for anything that might signal food or water. The distant sounds of human activity, cars on a far-off road, the faint hum of machinery, provided a strange, bittersweet comfort. They were a reminder of the world he'd lost, but also a hint that civilization wasn't entirely out of reach. His nose, a tool he had previously used for sniffing out treats or identifying friendly hands, now became his primary survival instrument. He learned to distinguish the scent of stagnant water from a hidden, cleaner source, to pick out the faint, alluring aroma of discarded human food amidst the overwhelming smells of nature. He stumbled upon a small, muddy stream, its water cloudy but moving. He drank deeply, ignoring the unpleasant taste, the desperate need for hydration overriding all else. It was a small victory, but a crucial one, giving him a temporary reprieve from the burning thirst that had plagued him. As he continued his slow, painful journey, he saw it, a cluster of dilapidated structures in the distance, partially obscured by overgrown trees. It looked like an old, abandoned farmstead. Hope, a fragile, tentative thing, flickered within him. Perhaps shelter. Perhaps even food. He pushed through thickets of thorny bush, his fur snagging, his skin pricked by sharp branches, his legs burning with effort. The closer he got, the more apparent the decay. A leaning barn, its roof partially collapsed. A crumbling farmhouse, its windows broken and boarded up. It was desolate, eerie, but to Buster, it represented possibility. He approached cautiously, his tail low, his ears flattened. He circled the farmhouse first, sniffing at the threshold, the faint scent of old dust and decay. No immediate threats. He then moved to the barn. The large wooden doors hung crooked on rusted hinges, one slightly ajar. He pushed his nose into the gap, nudged it open further, and slipped inside. The air was cool and still, thick with the scent of old hay and something else, something animal. He tensed, ready to bolt, but the scent was old, stale. No immediate danger. The barn was dark, shafts of sunlight piercing through gaps in the roof, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. He explored cautiously, his paws patting softly on the earthen floor. Broken farm equipment lay scattered, shrouded in cobwebs. Piles of long-rotted hay lay in corners, smelling faintly of mildew. In one corner, partially hidden behind a stack of old wooden crates, he found it. A small, relatively intact alcove, sheltered on three sides, with a patch of relatively clean, dry hay. It wasn't soft like his old bed, but it was dry, it was enclosed, and it offered protection from the wind and rain. He pushed his nose into the hay, inhaling the earthy smell, a sense of weary relief washing over him. This was it. A temporary haven, a place to rest, to recover, to plan. He curled up in the hay, his body aching, his mind still reeling from the past few days, but a faint sense of accomplishment settling over him. He had found water and now shelter. He was still desperately hungry, but for the first time since Mark had driven away, Buster felt a flicker of something other than pure despair. He was alive. He had survived the immediate shock. And in this dilapidated barn, amidst the ghosts of a forgotten past, he would begin the long, arduous process of learning how to truly survive. The sun was setting again, casting the barn interior in deep shadows. But inside, Buster felt a fragile, newfound sense of security. He closed his eyes, the hay surprisingly comfortable against his weary body, and for the first time in days, sleep came, deep and unburdened by immediate terror. The old barn became Buster's sanctuary, a crumbling fortress against the indifferent wilderness. Each morning, as the first sliver of light filtered through the gaps in the warped wooden planks, he would stir, his body still stiff, but his mind sharper, more alert. The initial days were a blur of intense learning. He quickly realized that staying in one place, even a safe one, wouldn't provide him with the sustenance he desperately needed. His hunger was a constant, gnawing presence, driving him out into the unfamiliar landscape. His routine began to solidify, dictated by the primal needs of survival. Dawn was for foraging. He would venture out, always keeping the barn in sight, a mental tether to his newfound home. His nose, once a tool for playful sniffing, became a precision instrument. He learned to distinguish the faint, sweet scent of discarded fruit from the pungent odor of decay, the rich aroma of something edible buried beneath leaves from the bland smell of inert soil. He scavenged along the edges of fields, near the occasional dirt road, always on the lookout for human cast-offs. A half-eaten sandwich left by a careless picnicker, a forgotten apple core, even discarded vegetable scraps near a distant, active farm, these became his treasures. Each find, no matter how small, was a victory, a temporary reprieve from the constant ache in his stomach. Water was equally crucial. He mapped out the local water sources in his mind, the muddy stream he first found, a small shallow pond fed by a natural spring a little further away, and the occasional puddle after a rain shower. He learned to approach these sources with caution, scanning for any signs of other animals, potential threats. He developed a habit of drinking quickly, his head up, constantly alert, before retreating to the safety of the barn. His senses, dulled by a life of comfort, sharpened with astonishing speed. The rustle of leaves was no longer just background noise. It was a potential rabbit, a squirrel, or something larger and more dangerous. The distant hoot of an owl, once just a sound, now indicated the presence of a nocturnal hunter. He learned to move silently, his paws padding softly over uneven terrain, his golden fur blending surprisingly well with the dry grasses and autumn leaves. He learned to read the subtle shifts in the wind, carrying scents from miles away, warning him of approaching humans or animals. He became acutely aware of the cycles of the day. The cool, quiet mornings were best for foraging. The heat of midday was for resting in the shade of the barn, conserving energy. Dusk was for a final, quick search before retreating to the safety of his hay-filled alcove, curling up and listening to the sounds of the night. His sleep, though still light and easily disturbed, became more regular. He was no longer trembling with constant fear, but rather with a heightened sense of awareness. His body began to change. The soft, pampered pads of his paws hardened, growing calloused and tough. His once sleek, full coat became a little matted, a little duller, but it was still thick, offering a degree of protection against the elements. He lost some of the puppy fat that had rounded his frame, and his muscles, constantly used for walking, running, and climbing, became lean and strong. He was no longer the pampered pet Buster. He was becoming a survivor, a creature of the wild, albeit one still haunted by the memory of a different life. He was still lonely, a deep, pervasive ache in his heart that no amount of food or water could assuage. He missed Mark's touch, his voice, the simple comfort of companionship. But the instinct to live, to endure, was powerful. He was learning to navigate this harsh new world, one scavenged meal, one cautious drink, one safe night at a time. The barn, though silent and empty, was his anchor, a symbol of his fragile, hard-won independence. He was left behind, but he was learning to stand on his own four paws. Autumn, with its crisp air and golden light, gradually began to yield to the chill of early winter. The days grew shorter, the sun weaker, and the nights stretched long and cold. Buster, now leaner and more agile, felt the change acutely. The leaves, which had provided a soft, rustling carpet, were now brittle and sparse, offering less concealment. The ground hardened, and the air carried the biting promise of frost. He had grown accustomed to the daily hunt for food and water, but the coming cold presented a new, formidable challenge, keeping warm. One evening, as the sky turned a bruised purple, a heavy, gray blanket of clouds rolled in, ominous and silent. A strange, biting wind began to whip through the cracks in the barn walls, carrying with it a scent Buster had never encountered before, the clean, sharp smell of impending snow. He huddled deeper into his hay bed, but the usual comfort was diminished. The temperature dropped rapidly, and his fur, though thick, felt inadequate against the penetrating cold. His breath misted in the air inside the barn, a visible testament to the plummeting mercury. Then it began. Not rain, but a soft, silent descent of tiny, cold crystals. Snow. At first, it was beautiful. A delicate dusting that transformed the drab landscape into a pristine, white wonderland. Buster watched from the barn entrance, his head cocked, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. He cautiously stepped out, his paws sinking into the soft, cold powder. He shook his head, a strange sensation, then tentatively pawed at it. It was cold, wet, and utterly alien. He remembered Mark's laughter as they'd played in the rare, light snowfalls of his old life, chasing flung snowballs, but this was different. This was relentless. As the hours passed, the snowfall intensified. The gentle flakes turned into a swirling blizzard, driven by a fierce wind. Visibility dropped to mere feet, and the world outside the barn became a chaotic blur of white. The temperature plummeted further, and the wind howled through every crack and crevice of the old structure, carrying drifts of snow into the barn itself. Buster retreated deeper into his alcove, pressing himself against the back wall, burying his nose in his tail, trying desperately to conserve body heat. His body began to shiver uncontrollably, a deep, persistent tremor that spoke of bone-chilling cold. Sleep was almost impossible. His muscles ached from the cold, and the constant awareness of the biting wind made him restless. He would occasionally stand, pace a few steps, then curl back into his ball, chasing the elusive warmth that seemed to vanish as quickly as he found it. The snow piled up outside the barn, burying the ground, covering any potential food sources. The stream he relied on for water would surely freeze. This was a new level of challenge, one he hadn't anticipated. His survival instincts screamed at him, find warmth, find food, find a way to endure. By morning, the storm had abated, leaving behind a landscape transformed. Everything was covered in a thick blanket of pristine, unbroken snow, several feet deep in places. The world was eerily silent, muffled by the fresh powder. Buster ventured cautiously out of the barn, sinking up to his chest in the drifts. The cold was intense, biting at his exposed nose and paws. He tried to walk, but the snow was too deep, his progress agonizingly slow. He realized with a chilling clarity that foraging for food would be nearly impossible. The snow had buried everything, and the sheer effort of moving through it would drain his precious energy reserves. He returned to the barn, defeated, a new kind of fear settling in his heart. The winter had arrived, not subtly, but with a brutal, undeniable force. His previous struggles had prepared him for hunger and loneliness, but not for this unrelenting cold and the complete obliteration of his food sources. He curled up again, shivering, knowing that his greatest test had just begun. He was a creature of warmth and comfort, now thrust into an icy, unforgiving world. His survival, already precarious, now hung by the thinnest of threads. The brutal reality of winter settled over the land like a suffocating shroud. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of relentless cold and gnawing hunger. The snow, once a beautiful novelty, had become his enemy, a thick, white barrier that hid food and made every step an arduous effort. Buster, now noticeably thinner, his ribs faintly visible beneath his matted fur, spent most of his time huddled in his hay bed, conserving every precious calorie. His dreams were often of warmth, of a full belly, of Mark's comforting hand, dreams that made the waking reality even more stark. One frigid afternoon, driven by an unbearable hunger, Buster decided to venture further than usual, hoping to find an area where the snow might be less deep, or where some discarded human food might have been exposed. His paws, though toughened, still ached with cold and the constant strain of pushing through drifts. He moved slowly, his head low, his nose constantly working, desperate for any promising scent. The world was silent, save for the crunch of his own paws on the snow and the distant, mournful sigh of the wind. He had wandered further from the barn than ever before, nearing the edge of a small, frozen pond he occasionally used for water in warmer months. The silence was suddenly broken by a sharp crack, followed by a deeper, guttural snarl. Buster froze, every instinct screaming danger. From behind a snow-laden thicket, a large, gaunt coyote emerged, its eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger that mirrored Buster's own. It was bigger than Buster, leaner, and clearly accustomed to the harsh realities of winter survival. Its fur was ragged, its teeth bared in a silent threat. Buster's hackles rose, a deep, guttural growl rumbling in his chest, a sound he hadn't known he could make. Fear warred with a primal defensive instinct. He was a domestic dog, but the wild had taught him to fight for his life. The coyote took a step forward, its gaze fixed on Buster's slender frame. Buster backed away slowly, his eyes locked on the predator, searching for an escape route. The coyote lunged, a swift, terrifying blur. Buster reacted on instinct, dodging to the side, a flash of golden fur against the white snow. The coyote's snapping jaws missed him by inches. He turned and ran, his legs pumping, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The deep snow made escape difficult, each step a struggle. He could hear the coyote hot on his heels, its snarls closer now. He darted between snow-laden trees, trying to use the thick trunks as cover, but the coyote was relentless. He scrambled over a fallen log, his paws slipping on the icy bark. The coyote, surprisingly agile, followed him over. Buster felt a sharp pain in his hind leg as the coyote's teeth grazed him, a searing burn that spurred him on with renewed terror. He saw it then, a narrow crevice between two large, snow-covered boulders, just wide enough for him to squeeze through. It was a desperate gamble. He threw himself towards it, pushing with all his remaining strength, his body scraping against the rough rock. He heard the frustrated snarl of the coyote as he squeezed through, emerging on the other side, winded and trembling. The coyote, too large to follow, paced angrily on the other side, its frustrated growls echoing through the silent, snowy landscape. Buster lay panting, his heart hammering against his ribs, the cold seeping into his exhausted body, but alive. He waited, motionless, until the coyote's pacing sounds eventually faded into the distance. The narrow escape had left him shaken, but also instilled a profound lesson. The wilderness was not just cold and hungry, it was actively dangerous. His survival was not guaranteed by finding food or shelter. It required constant vigilance and sometimes a desperate fight. He gingerly pushed himself up, his leg throbbing. He still hadn't found food, but he had found something else, a deeper understanding of the brutal, unforgiving world he now inhabited. He was alone, and every day was a battle. He turned and slowly, painfully, began the long journey back to the relative safety of his barn. The memory of the coyote's gleaming eyes burned into his mind. The wound on Buster's leg, a shallow but painful gash from the coyote's teeth, made every step a grim reminder of his close call. He limped back to the barn, the cold seeping into the injured limb, making it stiff and throbbing. For the next few days, he rarely left his hay bed, relying on his dwindling energy reserves and the last few scraps he'd managed to hoard. The fear of another encounter with the coyote, combined with the extreme cold and the difficulty of navigating the deep snow, kept him largely confined. His hunger became a constant, burning fire, but the risk of venturing out seemed too great. One afternoon, as the weakest winter sun cast pale, watery light through the barn's cracks, Buster heard it, the unmistakable sound of a vehicle approaching. It wasn't the distant hum of a highway car, but the slow, deliberate crunch of tires on the snowy dirt road that led past the abandoned farm. His ears perked, a flicker of his old hope reigniting. A human. Perhaps they would see him, help him. He remembered the kindness of Mark, the gentle voices of strangers in the park who would offer a friendly pat. He crept cautiously to the barn entrance, peering out through a gap in the warped door. A beat-up pickup truck, old and rusted, slowly pulled to a stop a few 100 feet down the road. A man emerged, dressed in a thick, stained jacket and a worn cap. He carried a rifle slung over his shoulder. Buster's tail gave a tentative, hopeful wag. He started to take a step forward, a soft whimper escaping his throat, ready to greet the potential rescuer. But then he paused. The man wasn't looking around with curiosity or the gentle air of someone lost. He was scanning the field, his eyes narrowed, a cold, calculating look on his face. He lifted the rifle, peering through its scope, not at Buster, but at something in the distant tree line. Buster had seen hunters with Mark before, but there was something different about this man's demeanor, a hardness that instinctively made Buster wary. His previous experiences with humans had been overwhelmingly positive, but the wild had taught him caution. The man lowered the rifle, then turned his gaze, sweeping it across the abandoned farmstead. His eyes landed on the partially open barn door, then chillingly on Buster himself. For a moment, their eyes met. Buster, hopeful, took another small step forward, a soft, inviting whine on his lips. The man's face remained impassive, unreadable. He didn't offer a kind word or a gesture of comfort. Instead, his hand slowly reached for something on his belt. Buster's instincts screamed. This was not kindness. This was not Mark. The man pulled out a small, dark object. A rock. He raised his arm and with surprising force hurled it towards the barn. It struck the warped wood of the doorframe with a loud, splintering thud, just inches from Buster's head. The sudden noise, the unexpected act of aggression, shattered Buster's fragile hope. He yelped, a startled, terrified sound, and recoiled, scrambling back into the darkest corner of the barn, his heart hammering against his ribs. The man chuckled, a rough, humorless sound, and then turned, getting back into his truck. The engine roared to life, and the truck slowly pulled away, leaving Buster trembling in the cold, dusty darkness. The encounter left a bitter taste in Buster's mouth, a chilling lesson learned. Not all humans were kind. Not all human presence meant rescue. Some were indifferent, some were even hostile. The trust he had once so freely given, the naive belief in universal human goodness, had been brutally shaken. His domestic past, where humans were providers and protectors, was slowly being eroded by the harsh realities of his new existence. He was truly alone, and he had to rely only on himself. The incident sealed his decision to remain hidden, to avoid human contact, to become a ghost in the landscape. The wound on his leg throbbed, a physical manifestation of the invisible wound inflicted upon his once trusting heart. He was truly left behind, not just by Mark, but by the very notion of human kindness he had once known. Weeks bled into months, and the brief, brutal encounter with the hunter cemented Buster's new philosophy: avoid humans at all costs. The memory of the thrown rock, the cold eyes, extinguished the last embers of his former life's trusting nature. He was no longer the dog who eagerly ran to greet every friendly face. He was a shadow, a ghost in the landscape, moving with a newfound wariness that kept him alive. Winter tightened its grip. The snow, which had seemed so deep, became even more formidable as fresh layers fell, burying the world under an almost impassable blanket. The temperatures plummeted to unthinkable lows, and the very air seemed to bite. Buster spent increasingly longer periods huddled in his hay bed, his body constantly shivering, his energy reserves perilously low. The barn, once a sanctuary, now felt like a fragile shell against the relentless cold. He survived on the meagerest scraps, often finding nothing for days, resorting to gnawing on frozen roots or desperate attempts to catch small, quick voles that scurried under the snow. His body continued to adapt, hardening, becoming leaner, more attuned to the harshness. His golden fur, once glossy, was now dull and matted, but it had grown thicker, providing a denser, if still inadequate, layer of insulation. His paws, once soft, were now like leather, impervious to the cold and rough terrain. His movements, once fluid and playful, became economical, precise, every step measured to conserve energy. He learned to read the subtle changes in the wind, the faint scent of distant water, the barely perceptible tracks of other animals. He was becoming truly feral, his instincts overriding his domesticated past. Spring eventually arrived, tentatively, like a shy visitor. The days slowly lengthened, and the sun, though still cool, held more warmth. The snow began its slow, reluctant melt, revealing the muddy, saturated earth beneath. Buster felt a profound, almost spiritual relief as the world began to thaw. The melting snow provided abundant water, dissolving the constant thirst. The ground, freed from its icy prison, began to yield new smells, new possibilities for food. Small shoots of green appeared, and the first insects buzzed in the air. Rabbits and squirrels, previously scarce, became more active, offering tantalizing, if still elusive, opportunities for a meal. As the snow receded, Buster ventured further, discovering new territories. He found a small, abandoned orchard, its gnarled trees still bearing some dried, shriveled apples from the previous year, a welcome, if meager, treat. He discovered a patch of wild berries, tart but edible. His diet diversified, and slowly, painstakingly, he began to regain some of the weight he had lost. His energy levels increased, and he found himself able to run for longer distances, his muscles remembering their former strength. Summer followed, a riot of green and warmth. The fields around the barn exploded with wildflowers, and the air was thick with the scent of pollen and growing things. Food was more abundant now. He learned to catch field mice, a skill he'd never imagined mastering, and occasionally found larger, more substantial discarded food near the periphery of active farms. The days were long and hot, and he spent many hours seeking shade, resting, conserving energy. He would sometimes lie in the tall grass, hidden from view, watching the world go by, a silent observer of the natural cycle of life. The seasons turned, but Buster remained a creature of the wild. His heart still held the deep, unfillable void of loneliness, the memory of Mark a dull ache. But his body and his spirit had hardened. He was no longer just surviving. He was living, albeit a solitary, guarded existence. The pampered pet was gone, replaced by a resilient, resourceful survivor. He was a testament to the enduring power of the will to live, a golden shadow moving silently through the changing landscape, forever marked by the journey of being left behind. As Buster's confidence grew within his expanded territory, his encounters with other creatures of the wild became more frequent. No longer was every rustle a reason for immediate flight. He began to distinguish between threats and fellow inhabitants of the forest. He often observed from a distance, hidden by dense foliage, learning the behaviors of deer, rabbits, and various birds. He saw families of raccoons foraging by the stream, their masked faces intent on their task. He even spotted a fox, its fiery tail a flash of color against the green, sleek and silent as it hunted. These observations taught him valuable lessons. He learned that most creatures were simply trying to survive, just like him. They were not inherently hostile unless threatened. This understanding brought a subtle shift in his own demeanor. While still cautious, his constant, high-strung fear began to recede, replaced by a more nuanced awareness. He was part of this ecosystem, a silent participant in the intricate dance of predator and prey. One warm afternoon, as he rested near his beloved spring, a flash of movement caught his eye. It wasn't a deer or a rabbit, but another dog. It was a scruffy, medium-sized mutt, its fur a patchy mix of brown and black, its ribs showing clearly. It moved with a similar wary grace, its nose to the ground, sniffing for food. Buster tensed, a mix of curiosity and apprehension washing over him. Was it a threat? Or something else? The other dog, seemingly oblivious to Buster's hidden presence, approached the spring cautiously, drank deeply, then continued on its way, disappearing into the undergrowth. Buster remained hidden, watching. A sense of profound loneliness, sharp and sudden, pierced through his hardened exterior. He hadn't realized how deeply he missed the presence of another canine, the familiar scent, the shared understanding. For a fleeting moment, he considered following, but his ingrained caution, the lesson of a hunter, held him back. He was a lone wolf now, by necessity. Days later, he saw the scruffy mutt again, this time near the edge of a distant field, sniffing at a discarded wrapper. He watched from behind a thick bush. The mutt was quick, snatching something from the ground and retreating into the trees. Buster, remembering his own struggles, felt a pang of empathy. They were both survivors, bound by the same harsh realities. His most surprising encounter came with a family of beavers. He stumbled upon their dam on a wider stream, a magnificent structure of sticks and mud. He watched, fascinated, as the beavers worked, tirelessly dragging branches, slapping their tails on the water. They seemed completely absorbed in their task, barely noticing his presence as long as he kept his distance. This observation brought a strange sense of peace. The world was full of life, full of creatures simply doing what they needed to do to survive, to build, to exist. These interactions, even from a distance, softened something within Buster. He was still wary, still a survivor, but he was no longer entirely consumed by fear. He began to see the wilderness not just as a source of danger and sustenance, but as a complex, living entity, and he, Buster, was a part of it. He was a lonely part, yes, forever yearning for the touch of a human hand, the sound of a familiar voice. But he was also a resilient part, a testament to the enduring power of life. He was a wild dog now, his golden fur a beacon in the dappled sunlight, moving silently through his vast, solitary kingdom, forever observing, forever learning, forever enduring. The memory of Mark was a distant echo, but the lessons of the wild were etched into his very being, guiding his every step. Despite his remarkable adaptation to the wild, the memories of his past life with Mark never entirely faded. They lay dormant, like embers beneath ashes, ready to flare up at the slightest trigger. Sometimes it was a familiar scent carried on the wind, a distant whiff of freshly cut grass, or the faint, sweet perfume of human cooking that would transport him back. Other times it was a sound, the distant laughter of children or the specific rumble of a certain type of car engine. One particularly warm summer afternoon, Buster was resting in the shade of a large oak tree, his belly relatively full from a successful hunt. The air was thick with the droning of cicadas, a lazy, hypnotic sound. He drifted into a light sleep, and in that liminal state, a dream, vivid and painfully real, took hold. He was back in Mark's house, the cool, smooth tile of the kitchen floor beneath his paws. The sun streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, just as it always did. He saw Mark, bustling in the kitchen, humming a tuneless melody. The familiar clinking of his food bowl, the rustle of the kibble bag, sounds that once meant pure joy. Mark bent down, his hand reaching out, not for a quick pat, but for a long, slow scratch behind his ears, exactly the way Buster loved it. The pressure was perfect, the warmth of Mark's fingers, the soothing rhythm. Buster leaned into the touch, a low rumble of contentment vibrating in his chest. He could smell Mark's familiar scent, a mix of soap, his unique human smell, and the faint aroma of the coffee he always drank. In the dream, he was playful, nudging Mark's hand, inviting him to a game of fetch. Mark laughed, a rich, warm sound that filled the room. He picked up Buster's favorite worn tennis ball, its fuzzy yellow surface familiar and inviting. He tossed it, and Buster, with a joyful bark, sprang after it, the world a blur of green grass and unadulterated happiness. The dream was so real, so tangible, that for a moment, the past and present blurred. He felt the weight of the ball in his mouth, the thrill of the chase, the warmth of Mark's hand as he took it back. Then the dream began to fray at the edges. The edges of the room softened, the colors muted. Mark's laughter grew distant, fading into an echoing whisper. The warmth of his hand dissipated, replaced by the cool, rough bark of the oak tree. The scent of coffee vanished, replaced by the earthy smell of the forest. Buster whimpered in his sleep, his body twitching as he clung to the fading vision. He tried to run back to Mark, to the warm, sunlit kitchen, but the dream pulled away, dissolving into swirling darkness. He awoke with a jolt, his heart pounding, a raw, aching sense of loss overwhelming him. The cicadas still droned, the sun still shone, but the vividness of the dream made the reality of his solitude even more acute. He looked around, his eyes wide, searching for any lingering trace of Mark, any sign that the dream had been more than just a fleeting hallucination. But there was nothing. Only the silent, indifferent trees, the rustling leaves, the vast, empty expanse of the wild. A single hot tear traced a path down his matted cheek, a rare indulgence in the grief he usually suppressed. The dream had been a cruel reminder of what he had lost, a stark contrast to the harsh, solitary existence he now led. He missed Mark with an intensity that took his breath away. The pain was fresh, as if the abandonment had happened just yesterday. He pushed himself to his feet, shaking off the lingering sorrow, forcing himself to focus on the present. The dream was a ghost, a beautiful, painful ghost. He was a survivor, he had to be. The memory would always be there, a part of him, but he could not dwell in the past. He had to live in the now, in the unforgiving, beautiful, and lonely wild. As autumn leaves began to fall, painting the forest in fiery hues, Buster felt a familiar dread creeping in. The days grew shorter, the air sharper, carrying the unmistakable scent of approaching winter. He remembered the brutal cold of the previous year, the scarcity of food, the desperate fight for warmth. He was stronger now, more cunning, but the prospect of another winter filled him with a deep, unsettling anxiety. He began to prepare, driven by instinct. He found a new, more sheltered spot deeper within the barn, a small, enclosed space between two collapsed walls that offered better protection from the wind. He dragged in extra hay, leaves, and dried grasses, creating a thicker, warmer bed. He intensified his foraging, trying to build up his fat reserves, eating every scrap he could find, even things he would have previously shunned. He hunted relentlessly, his success rate slightly improved, but still challenging as the smaller prey became scarcer. Then the first snow fell. Not a gentle dusting, but a heavy, silent blanket that descended overnight, transforming the landscape into a vast, white expanse. The world became eerily quiet, muffled by the fresh powder. Buster ventured out cautiously, his paws sinking into the drifts, the cold biting at his nose. The stream he relied on for water was already partially frozen, and he knew it wouldn't be long before it was solid ice. His daily routine became a desperate struggle. Each step through the deep snow was an exhausting effort, draining precious energy. Food was incredibly difficult to find, buried under layers of white. He spent hours sniffing, digging, often coming up empty-pawed. The few mice or voles he managed to catch were barely enough to sustain him. His body, though hardened, began to shed weight rapidly. The gnawing hunger became a constant companion, a dull ache that never truly subsided. Thirst was another relentless foe. He learned to break thin layers of ice on stagnant puddles with his paw, or to lick the fresh snow, but neither provided adequate hydration. His throat was often dry and raw. The cold seeped into his bones, a constant, pervasive chill that made his muscles ache and his joints stiff. He shivered almost constantly, even when huddled deep in his new, improved bed. One particularly harsh week, a blizzard raged for 3 days straight, trapping him inside the barn. The wind howled like a banshee, whipping snow through every crack and crevice. The temperature plummeted to dangerous lows, and Buster felt the insidious creeping of hypothermia. He curled into the tightest ball, burying his nose in his tail, his body trembling violently. He was so cold, so hungry, that his thoughts began to drift, blurring the line between reality and hallucination. He saw Mark's face, not in a dream, but in the swirling snow, his voice a faint whisper on the wind. It was a cruel torment, a reminder of the warmth and comfort he no longer had. He survived the blizzard, but emerged weaker, more gaunt, his spirit battered but not broken. His paws were raw from the cold, and a cough had settled in his chest, a harsh, dry sound that worsened with exertion. He was a shadow of his former self, a testament to the brutal indifference of the season. He moved slower, his head low, his energy reserved for the essential tasks of survival. The wilderness had pushed him to his limits, testing every ounce of his resilience. He was living on borrowed time, his strength waning, his chances of seeing spring grow slimmer with each passing frozen day. The winter's grip was tightening, and Buster was fighting a battle he wasn't sure he could win. He was left behind, and now the elements were trying to finish the job. The deep winter continued its relentless assault. Buster's body, once a vibrant testament to health, was now a skeletal frame draped in dull matted fur. His golden coat, once his pride, now served as a grim canvas for the scars of survival. Patches of missing fur, thin skin stretched taut over his ribs, and the ever-present raw spots on his paws. The cough in his chest had worsened, a deep, rattling sound that shook his entire body with each exertion. He moved slowly, deliberately, every muscle screaming in protest, every step a monumental effort. His eyes, once bright and full of life, were now sunken and dull, reflecting a profound weariness. He was constantly hungry, a gnawing, burning emptiness that never went away. He had exhausted all the easy food sources, and the effort required to dig through feet of packed. Snow for a meager root or a frozen scrap was often more than the calories it provided. He had resorted to eating bark from trees, desperate and unpalatable, but offering a fleeting sense of something in his stomach. Thirst was equally agonizing, forcing him to lick frozen puddles or chew on bits of dirty ice, his body constantly craving more liquid. There were days when he simply couldn't move. He would lie in his hay bed, shivering uncontrollably, the cold seeping into his very bones, his breath misting in the frigid air of the barn. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his dreams a confusing jumble of past comforts and present torments. He felt the insidious pull of surrender, the tempting whisper of simply giving up, letting the cold take him. It would be easier, his exhausted mind reasoned. No more hunger, no more pain, no more loneliness. But deep within him, a tiny, stubborn spark refused to be extinguished. It was the primal will to live, an ancient, unyielding force that transcended pain and despair. He thought of Mark, not in sorrow, but with a strange, fierce determination. He had been left behind, yes, but he wouldn't let that be his end. He would not give up. He would fight for every breath, every heartbeat, every single meager scrap of life. He was a survivor, and that identity was now inextricably woven into the very fabric of his being. One particularly cold morning, he managed to push himself to his feet. His legs trembled violently, threatening to give way. He stumbled out of the barn, his vision blurring, but he forced himself forward. He needed water. He needed something. He dragged himself towards the frozen stream, his cough echoing in the crisp, silent air. He saw a small, dark patch near the bank, a tiny section where the ice had cracked, revealing a sliver of dark, flowing water underneath. It was a miracle. He collapsed beside it, his body too weak to stand, and lapped greedily at the icy water, ignoring the pain in his throat. The cold liquid was a shock, but it was also life, seeping into his parched body, awakening dormant cells. He drank until he could drink no more, then lay there, panting, feeling a faint resurgence of energy. It was a small victory, but in his weakened state, it felt like a monumental triumph. He had pushed through the urge to surrender, and he had found water. He was still alive. He was still fighting. The act of finding water, of pushing past the brink of collapse, reaffirmed his resolve. He would continue to seek, to fight, to endure. He was a testament to the unyielding power of life in the face of overwhelming odds. He was left behind, but he was not yet defeated. His body might be ravaged, his spirit weary, but the will to survive, to see another sunrise, burned fiercely within him, a tiny golden flame against the vast, indifferent darkness of winter. He would not succumb, not yet. He had come too far for that. As winter's grip began its slow, grudging release, Buster, though still gaunt and weary, felt a subtle shift in the air. The sun, though still low in the sky, seemed to hold more warmth, and the days, almost imperceptibly, began to lengthen. The snow, once a solid, unforgiving blanket, started to show signs of softening, developing a slushy texture in places. These were tiny signals, almost imperceptible to an untrained eye, but to Buster, a creature now exquisitely attuned to the rhythms of nature, they were harbingers of hope. His cough, though still present, seemed less frequent, and he found he could move for slightly longer periods without complete exhaustion. He still struggled immensely for food, but the occasional patch of melted snow revealed buried roots or last year's hardy berries, providing a trickle of much-needed sustenance. He pushed himself daily, driven by the knowledge that survival was a continuous battle, but one that now held the promise of spring. One late afternoon, as he scoured the edges of a distant, snow-covered field, his heightened senses picked up an unusual scent. It wasn't the harsh metallic tang of the hunter, nor the wild, earthy aroma of the coyote. This scent was different. It was subtle, almost sweet, infused with a warmth that was vaguely familiar, yet elusive. It was the scent of human presence, but it lacked the cold indifference or threat he had come to associate with it. It was gentle. It was compassion. He froze, his body tensing, his instincts warning him to retreat. But the scent was compelling, drawing him in. He cautiously moved closer, keeping to the cover of a thicket of bare trees, peering through the branches. In the middle of the field, a small, dark shape moved. It was a person bundled in a thick coat, kneeling in the snow. They were not carrying a rifle, nor did they move with the aggressive posture of a hunter. As Buster watched, the person carefully placed something on the snow. It was a small, steaming bowl. The scent intensified, warm and savory, a smell that made Buster's stomach clench with an almost unbearable hunger. It smelled of cooked meat, of something nourishing and soft, utterly unlike the frozen scraps he'd been fighting for. The person then stood up slowly, looking around, and then began to walk away, deliberately, slowly, without looking back, disappearing over a distant rise. Buster remained hidden, trembling, torn between his deep-seated fear of humans and the overpowering lure of the food. His mind raced. Was it a trap? Another cruel trick? But the person had left, walking away, not hiding, not waiting. The scent of the food was almost unbearable, a symphony of deliciousness that promised warmth and strength. His hunger, a constant companion for months, was a powerful motivator. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only a few minutes, Buster cautiously emerged from the trees. He approached the bowl, his tail low, his movements slow and deliberate, ready to bolt at the slightest sign of danger. He sniffed at the steaming contents. It was real. Soft, cooked meat mixed with something else, a broth. He glanced around one last time, then, unable to resist, he tentatively lowered his head and began to eat. He ate slowly at first, then with increasing urgency, savoring every mouthful, the warmth spreading through his starved body, a comfort he hadn't felt in months. It was the most delicious thing he had ever tasted, a lifeline thrown to him in his darkest hour. When the bowl was empty, he licked it clean, then sat back on his haunches, his gaze fixed on the spot where the person had disappeared. This was different. This was kindness. A glimmer of a new hope, fragile but persistent, began to flicker in Buster's weary heart. The world, which had seemed utterly indifferent, had offered a small, profound act of compassion. He was still left behind, but perhaps, just perhaps, not entirely alone. The discovery of the food and the deliberate act of kindness that accompanied it had a profound effect on Buster. It was a lifeline, not just physically, but emotionally. The next morning, he returned to the field, his senses alert, his heart a mix of trepidation and anticipation. The bowl was gone, but the faint, lingering scent of the food and the gentle human remained. He spent the day restless, torn between his ingrained fear and the powerful lure of that new, benevolent presence. He returned to the same spot just before dusk, as the sky began to turn to shades of orange and purple. He hid in the same thicket, watching, and then the person appeared again. It was a woman, her movements quiet and deliberate. She wore the same thick coat, her head covered by a hood. She carried another steaming bowl. She placed it down, exactly as before, and then, without looking back, she walked away, disappearing over the rise. Buster waited, counting the seconds, then minutes. His hunger was intense, but the desire to understand, to somehow verify this strange kindness, was almost as strong. When he was sure she was gone, he emerged from his hiding spot, approached the bowl, and devoured its contents. This time, as he ate, he felt a warmth spreading through him that was more than just the food. It was the warmth of a tentative trust, a feeling he hadn't experienced in what felt like an eternity. This became their silent ritual. Every evening, just before dusk, the woman would appear, leave a bowl of food, and then quietly depart. Buster would watch, hidden, then emerge to eat. Over days, then weeks, the pattern solidified. He began to associate the fading light with the promise of food and the scent of the woman with safety, with care. His gaunt frame slowly began to fill out, his fur regaining some of its lost luster. The cough in his chest gradually subsided, and his movements became stronger, more fluid. He was healing both physically and emotionally. His fear of humans, though still present, began to differentiate. He still avoided strangers, still remained hidden from anyone else he encountered, but the woman was different. She was not a threat. She was a provider, a quiet, consistent source of comfort in a world that had offered him so little. He started to feel a powerful, almost irresistible urge to approach her, to acknowledge her kindness, to perhaps even feel the touch of a human hand again. One evening, as she placed the bowl down, she lingered for a moment longer than usual. She looked around, and Buster felt her gaze pass over his hiding spot as if she knew he was there. She spoke softly, her voice a gentle murmur carried on the wind. "You're a good boy, aren't you? You just need a friend." Her voice was soft, melodic, utterly devoid of the harshness he'd encountered from the hunter. It resonated deep within him, stirring a longing he had thought long dead. He whimpered softly, an involuntary sound. The woman turned her head slightly, her gaze lingering on the thicket. She didn't approach, didn't try to force contact. She simply smiled, a small, sad, knowing smile, and then walked away. That smile, that soft voice, that unwavering patience chipped away at the hardened shell around Buster's heart. He felt drawn to her, pulled by an invisible thread of compassion. The wilderness had taught him caution, but this woman was teaching him something else, that even after profound loss, the capacity for trust and for connection could still exist. He was left behind, but he was slowly, cautiously being lured back towards the light of human kindness. The silent ritual continued, but the unspoken tension between Buster and the kind woman grew. Each evening, as she placed the food, he felt an almost unbearable urge to reveal himself, to bridge the distance. Her patience was unwavering. She never tried to approach him, never made a sudden movement. She simply left the food, spoke a few soft, reassuring words, and then retreated, allowing him the space and time he needed. One evening, as the first stars began to prick the twilight sky, Buster found himself unable to stay completely hidden. Instead of remaining deep in the thicket, he moved to the very edge, his body partially obscured, but his head visible. He watched her approach, his tail getting the smallest, most tentative of wags, a gesture he hadn't made in months. The woman paused, her eyes kind and gentle, meeting his across the expanse of the field. She smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Hello, beautiful boy," she murmured, her voice a soothing balm. She placed the bowl down, a little closer to his hiding spot than usual. Instead of turning away immediately, she took a single step back, then knelt down slowly, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. She extended an open hand, palm up, not reaching for him, but simply offering it, a silent invitation. Buster's heart pounded. His instincts screamed caution, but his longing for connection, for the touch he remembered so vividly from his life with Mark, was overwhelming. He took a tentative step forward, then another. His paws, once raw, now hardened, crunched softly on the dry grass. He stopped a few feet from her, his nose twitching, taking in her scent, clean, comforting, utterly safe. He looked at her hand, then at her eyes, searching for any hint of deceit. There was none. Only patience and a deep, empathetic understanding. Slowly, agonizingly, he stretched out his neck, then his nose, and gently, softly, touched her outstretched fingertips with his wet nose. It was a fleeting contact, barely a brush, but it sent a jolt of warmth through his entire body. It was the first human touch he had felt in what felt like a lifetime that was unthreatening or painful. The woman remained motionless, her breath held, her eyes shining. He pulled back, a surge of adrenaline rushing through him, then hesitated. The desire for more was too strong. He took another step forward, then nudged her hand again, this time a little more firmly. The woman's smile widened, but she still didn't move, allowing him to dictate the pace. He finally tentatively licked her hand, a small, grateful gesture. The warmth of her skin, the gentle pressure of her fingers as they remained still, was profoundly comforting. After a few moments, he pulled back, his courage spent for the evening. The woman slowly rose, her movement still gentle, still respectful of his boundaries. "That's enough for today, my brave boy," she whispered. "I'll see you tomorrow." She turned and walked away, and Buster watched her go, a profound sense of peace settling over him. He had taken the first step. He had extended a fragile tendril of trust, and it had been met with nothing but kindness. The long, hard journey of being left behind had finally led him to a place where healing, and perhaps even a new beginning, felt possible. The bond, still unspoken, had begun to form, a bridge slowly being built across the chasm of his past pain. The tentative touch on the woman's hand was a turning point. Each subsequent evening, Buster's trust grew bolder. He would wait at the very edge of the field, no longer fully hidden, his tail wagging a little more freely as he watched her approach. The woman, whose name he would come to know as Sarah, continued her patient, gentle overtures. She would sit a little closer, speak to him in soft, soothing tones, and extend her hand, allowing him to initiate contact. He no longer just nudged her hand. He would lean into her touch, allowing her to gently scratch behind his ears, a sensation that brought back a flood of comforting memories, but now without the pain of loss. After a week of these slow, deliberate interactions, Sarah brought a soft blanket. She spread it on the ground a few feet from his feeding spot. "Come on, brave boy," she murmured, patting the blanket. Buster hesitated, then, drawn by the warmth in her voice and the appealing softness of the fabric, he cautiously approached, sniffed, and then, with a sigh, lay down. Sarah sat a short distance away, talking to him, her voice a gentle murmur in the twilight. He felt a profound peace, the first true relaxation he'd experienced since his abandonment. One evening, as he lay on the blanket, Sarah slowly, carefully extended her hand and began to stroke his matted fur. It was a tentative touch at first, but as Buster leaned into it, a deep rumble of contentment vibrated in his chest. She began to gently untangle the knots, her fingers working patiently. It was painful at first, but the relief that came with each freed snarl, combined with the sheer comfort of her touch, outweighed the discomfort. He had forgotten the simple pleasure of being groomed, of being cared for. After several weeks of consistent feeding and gentle interaction, the day came for the next step. Sarah arrived, as usual, with food, but this time she also carried a soft, sturdy leash. Buster tensed, a flicker of his old fear returning. He remembered Mark putting on his leash for walks, a sign of adventure. But now, it felt like a symbol of restraint, of being taken somewhere. Sarah sensed his hesitation. She didn't force it. She placed the leash gently on the ground, a few feet from the food, and sat down. "It's okay, boy," she murmured. "I just want to help you. Take you somewhere safe, warm, a home." She spoke softly, patiently, for a long time, explaining what she wanted to do, her voice calm and reassuring. Buster looked at the leash, then at her face. He trusted her. He truly did. The wilderness had been his teacher, but it had also been his tormentor. The lure of a warm, safe home, of consistent food and gentle hands, was too strong to resist. Finally, with a deep breath, he rose. He walked to the leash, sniffed it, then looked at Sarah. She slowly reached out, picked it up, and gently clipped it to his collar. He felt the familiar weight, but this time it felt different. Not a prelude to abandonment, but a connection, a promise of safety. He walked beside her, tentatively at first, then with a growing confidence. As she led him towards a waiting car, not the same one that had left him, but a different one, promising a different future. He got into the car willingly, settling onto a soft blanket Sarah had laid out for him. The drive was short, and he felt no panic, only a quiet anticipation. They arrived at a local animal shelter, a clean, quiet place that smelled faintly of antiseptic and other dogs. Sarah stayed with him, comforting him as he was checked by a kind veterinarian. He was tired, but for the first time in a very long time, he felt a profound sense of relief. He was no longer alone. He was no longer left behind. He was found, and the journey of healing had truly begun. The animal shelter was a cacophony of new sights and smells, overwhelming at first, but tempered by the constant presence of Sarah. She stayed with him as the kind veterinarian examined him, her gentle hand a steady anchor. He was given a warm bath, an experience he hadn't known he missed until the suds worked through his matted fur, washing away months of dirt, grime, and the lingering scent of the wild. His golden coat, though still thin, began to regain a hint of its former luster. He was given a soft, clean bed, a bowl overflowing with delicious, nutritious food, and fresh, cool water that flowed freely. For the first few days, he mostly slept, his body recuperating from the months of deprivation, his mind slowly unwinding from the constant vigilance. Sarah visited him every day, spending hours by his kennel, talking to him, brushing his fur, and simply sitting with him. She was his bridge between the wild and this new, safe world. Other shelter staff were kind, gentle, and patient, understanding his initial wariness. He slowly allowed them to touch him, to lead him on walks in a small, enclosed yard. He learned that not all humans were indifferent or cruel. Many, like Sarah, were sources of immense kindness and comfort. The wounds on his paws healed, and the cough in his chest vanished. He began to gain weight, his muscles filling out, his steps becoming springier, more confident. After 2 weeks at the shelter, strong and healthy again, Buster was ready for the next step, adoption. Sarah had made it clear that she couldn't adopt him herself due to her living situation, a fact that brought a momentary pang of disappointment, but her continued presence and reassurance helped. She promised him that the right family would come, a family that would cherish him, and she was right. One sunny afternoon, a quiet couple, a man and a woman named David and Emily, visited the shelter. They moved with a gentle demeanor, their voices soft and reassuring. They spent a long time with Buster, sitting by his kennel, talking to him in soothing tones, offering him treats. Buster surprisingly felt an immediate, strong connection. Their hands were kind, their eyes warm and full of affection. He nudged their hands, leaned into their scratches, and even offered a tentative lick. They were patient, understanding his past, and they saw beyond his history of abandonment, seeing only the loving, resilient dog he was. It was a perfect match. David and Emily were looking for a loyal companion, and Buster was looking for a her home. The adoption was finalized, and as Sarah, with tears in her eyes, said her final goodbyes, Buster walked out of the shelter with his new family. Their home was quiet and cozy, filled with soft blankets, comfortable furniture, and the enticing aroma of home-cooked meals. He had his own soft bed, a designated spot by the fireplace, and an endless supply of fresh water and delicious food. His first few days in his new home were a revelation. He explored every corner, sniffed every scent, and slowly, cautiously, allowed himself to relax. He discovered the joy of long, leisurely walks in a safe, fenced yard, the simple pleasure of chasing a thrown ball without fear. David and Emily were everything he could have hoped for, patient, loving, and understanding. They never pushed him, allowing him to set the pace for their bond to deepen. He learned to trust completely again, his heart, once shattered, slowly mending. Months passed and Buster flourished. His golden fur was once again thick and lustrous, his eyes bright with happiness and contentment. He would often be found curled up on the sofa, his head resting on David or Emily's lap, a soft, rumbling purr of a dog vibrating in his chest. The memories of being left behind, of the cold, the hunger, The fear still lingered, a faint shadow in the corners of his mind. But they no longer defined him. They were a part of his story, a testament to his strength, but they were overshadowed by the overwhelming warmth of love and belonging. Buster, once abandoned and alone, had found his forever home. He was a testament to resilience, to the enduring power of hope, and to the profound bond between humans and animals. His lonely survival had ended, replaced by a life filled with comfort, security, and the unwavering love of a family who would never leave him behind. He was home, and he was finally truly happy.